Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 4, Episode 2, Diplomatic Immunity. Nolan Mercer sits behind his desk in Ops on Empire North, studying reports on a floating display. The familiar hum of the repurposed Cardassian station surrounds him as Ilara enters. "Incoming transmission from Deep Space Nine," she informs him. "It's Major Kira." Nolan's expression shifts slightly. Interactions with Kira are rarely pleasant. "Put her through." Major Kira's stern face appears on screen. "Mercer," she acknowledges curtly. "Major," Nolan responds with exaggerated politeness. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "The Bajoran Provisional Government has a request," Kira says, clearly uncomfortable with being the messenger. "The Vexillian Alliance and Nelvian Confederacy have agreed to peace talks. They've specifically requested neutral ground for negotiations." Nolan raises an eyebrow. "And they consider my humble station neutral ground?" "I'm flattered." Kira's expression hardens. "They don't trust the Federation enough to hold the talks at DS9. Your reputation apparently makes you acceptable to both sides." "My reputation?" Nolan echoes with mock innocence. "As someone who will deal with anyone if the price is right," Kira says bluntly. Nolan pretends to consider, though already knowing his answer. "The Vexillian system sits at a crucial trade junction. And what does Bajor get out of this?" "Stability in the region benefits everyone," Kira replies stiffly, "including your operations." "Fair enough. Tell the provisional government I'll host their talks," Nolan agrees. "When can I expect the delegates?" "Within 48 hours, Kira says. "And Mercer, Constable Odo will be accompanying the delegations. Starfleet and Bajor want security representation." Nolan's smile fades slightly. "Of course they do." A sleek diplomatic vessel docks at Empire North. Nolan stands at the airlock, flanked by security personnel, as the delegates disembark. Constable Odo is the first to step through. His shapeshifter features set in their perpetual skeptical expression. "Constable," Nolan greets him, extending a hand that Odo pointedly ignores. "Mr. Mercer," Odo responds, his voice dripping with suspicion. "I trust your security protocols are adequate for an event of this magnitude." "They've kept me alive this long," Nolan replies with a smirk. "Though I hear you've formed some rather strong opinions about me and my operations." Odo harumphs. "I form opinions based on facts, Mr. Mercer, and the facts surrounding you are troubling." "Kira's been telling stories again?" Nolan asks, leading Odo away from the airlock as the delegates continue to disembark. "Major Kira, among others," Odo confirms. "Your reputation precedes you." As they walk through the bustling corridors of Empire North, Nolan gestures around them. The station is a bit more fun since the Cardassians moved out. Now it's a thriving center of commerce. He leads Odo toward a turbolift. "Let me show you the embassy section down past the labs." The turbolift rises to the upper levels of the promenade, opening onto a corridor lined with offices, each bearing different insignias. "What is this? Some kind of diplomatic row?" Odo asks, eyeing the varied beings entering and exiting the offices. "Something like that," Nolan explains. "Representatives from dozens of worlds maintain a presence here. It's good for business." Odo scrutinizes the occupants of the nearest office. "They look like spies," he grumbles. "They are spies," Nolan announces loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Several heads turn briefly before returning to their conversations, completely unfazed. Odo stares at him in disbelief. "And you just allow this?" Nolan shrugs. "Everyone spies on everyone, Constable. I prefer to keep it where I can see it." He taps his temple. "Know your enemies, know your friends, and especially know those who are both." Below them, the promenade has transformed for the diplomatic reception. Delegates from the warring factions are arriving, mingling cautiously with each other. Ambassador Trell of the Vexillian Alliance, Nolan points out a tall, regal figure with iridescent skin, speaking with several aides. Their faction has subtle Federation backing. "And that would be Minister Carr of the Nelvian Confederacy," Odo observes, nodding toward a stockier being whose ceremonial garb bears similarities to Cardassian design elements. Rumored to have Cardassian support. Very good, Constable, Nolan acknowledges. And the striking woman in green is Trade Envoy Lyra of the Independent Worlds. Officially neutral, but unofficially, let me guess. Odo interjects dryly. She has her own agenda. Everyone does, Nolan says simply. The art is figuring out what it is before they do. He gestures toward the gathering. Shall we join the festivities? I believe we both have roles to play in this diplomatic dance. Odo straightens his uniform with a tug. Indeed. Though I suspect our choreography will differ substantially. Nolan smiles thinly as they descend to the promenade. On that, Constable, we can certainly agree. The reception below is a display of forced politeness, with representatives from the warring factions maintaining careful distance while making shows of diplomatic engagement. Nolan works the room with practiced ease, navigating the complex web of alliances and animosities, while Odo observes from the periphery, his keen eyes missing nothing. As evening approaches, the tensions seem to ease slightly with the help of exotic beverages and Nolan's hospitable atmosphere. Delegates begin to disperse to their assigned quarters. The first day of talks set to begin in the morning, until a scream echoes through the station coming from near the turbolifts. Security personnel rush to the scene, with Nolan and Odo close behind. They arrive to find a maintenance worker backed against the wall, pointing shakily at the open turbolift shaft. Inside, sprawled at an unnatural angle, lies the body of Ambassador Trell, his iridescent skin now dull and lifeless, a diplomatic mission ended before it could begin. The harsh emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across Ambassador Trell's body. His iridescent skin, normally shimmering with life, lay dull and lifeless against the metal floor of the turbolift shaft. Security personnel created a perimeter as onlookers gathered at the edges. Odo moved with practiced efficiency, kneeling beside the body without touching it, eyes cataloging every detail. "Everyone back," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority that transcended jurisdictional boundaries. Nolan stood at the edge of the scene, arms crossed. "This is my station, Constable." "And this is my investigation," Odo replied without looking up. "Unless you'd prefer I contact Starfleet and have them send a full security team." Nolan's jaw tightened. "By all means, proceed." He tapped his comm badge. "Ilara, I need you at the turbolift shaft on Promenade Level 2. Seconds later, Ilara materialized beside them, her physical form drawing a surprised look from Odo. "Your AI has a mobile emitter?" Odo asked. "Not exactly," Nolan replied vaguely. "Ilara, access all surveillance footage of this area for the past 6 hours." Ilara nodded, her eyes briefly unfocusing as she processed the request. "I've located the relevant recordings. However," she frowned, "there appears to be a 23-minute gap in the footage, beginning at 20,014 hours. "Convenient," Odo remarked dryly. "Indeed," Nolan agreed, though not entirely surprising. Whoever did this had to bring the jamming tech on board with them. Odo rose to his feet. "Time of death?" Ilara scanned the body. "Approximately 2 hours ago, judging by the cellular degradation. The cause appears to be a precision energy weapon, likely fired at close range." "I'll need to speak with the Nelvaean delegates," Odo declared. "Minister Carr was seen having a heated discussion with Ambassador Trell earlier today." Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to observe, Mr. Mercer. Something we apparently have in common." "Before you start throwing accusations around," Nolan cautioned, "let me show you something." He gestured to a nearby room. In private, once inside the small security office, Nolan activated a panel hidden beneath a standard console. A holographic display flickered to life, showing Minister Carr and Ambassador Trell in a corridor. Odo's brow furrowed. "This isn't standard surveillance footage." "No, it's not," Nolan confirmed. "Let's just say I keep my own security records." separate from the main system, and conveniently immune to whatever caused the gap in official recordings. Precisely. The hologram showed Carr and Trell in the midst of what was clearly an intense discussion. Minister Carr strode purposefully through the corridor, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him. The reception had been a tedious affair, full of empty pleasantries and hollow promises. Now, finally, he had a moment alone with Ambassador Trell, away from prying eyes. Or so he thought. "Ambassador," Carr called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "A word, if you please." Trell turned, his iridescent skin shifting hues in a pattern that suggested irritation. "Minister Carr, I was just returning to my quarters." "This won't take long," Carr promised, closing the distance between them. "I wanted to discuss your proposal regarding the Vexillian mining rights." Trell's skin flashed a deep crimson. "There is nothing to discuss. The Mogai asteroid belt falls within our territory according to the Antioch Accords." "Accords that were signed under Federation pressure," Carr countered, his voice rising. "Accords that have been systematically ignored when it benefits your people." "We are not here to relitigate past agreements, Minister," Trell said coldly. "If your people want access to the dilithium deposits, you'll need to negotiate a trade agreement like any other power." Carr stepped closer, the ornate metal clasps on his robe catching the light. "And pay exorbitant fees for resources that rightfully belong to both our peoples? I think not." "Then these talks are already doomed to failure," Trell replied, turning to leave. Carr grabbed Trell's arm, his fingers digging into the ambassador's flesh. "Do not turn your back on me. Not when we both know what's really at stake here." Trell yanked his arm free, his skin rippling with patterns of alarm. "Remove your hands from me, whatever you think you know." "I know enough," Carr hissed. "Enough to expose your Federation backers and their true interests in our sector." "Be careful, Minister," Trell warned, his voice suddenly quiet. "Some threats, once made, cannot be retracted." Carr stepped back, his expression hardening. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "Merely an observation," Trell replied. "I'll see you at the negotiations tomorrow, assuming you still wish to participate." With that, Trell turned and walked away, leaving Carr standing alone in the corridor, fists clenched at his sides. The hologram froze on the image of Carr watching Trell's departure, his expression unreadable. "Interesting," Odo remarked. "But this hardly exonerates Minister Carr. If anything, it establishes motive." "True," Nolan conceded, "but it's too convenient. The Nelvaeans may not be subtle, but they're not foolish enough to murder a diplomat after publicly threatening him. Unless that was precisely their intention, to make it so obvious that we'd second-guess ourselves." Nolan shook his head. "Let's continue our investigation before jumping to conclusions. I suggest we start with the embassy offices. If anyone knows anything, it'll be the resident spies." "You mean diplomats," Odo corrected sarcastically. "I mean exactly what I said," Nolan replied, leading the way out of the security office. Embassy Row was buzzing with activity, news of the ambassador's death spreading rapidly through diplomatic channels. Nolan and Odo moved from office to office, their unlikely partnership drawing curious glances. Their first stop was the small but elegantly appointed Romulan liaison office. Subcommander Velik rose from behind his desk as they entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Mercer," he acknowledged with a slight incline of his head. "Constable Odo, I presume this is about the unfortunate incident involving Ambassador Trell." "News travels fast," Nolan observed. "Information is currency," Velik replied simply. "How can I assist you, gentlemen?" Odo stepped forward. "We're speaking with everyone who might have observed Ambassador Trell's movements today. Did you happen to see him in this area?" Velik's expression remained impassive, but Nolan noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. "As it happens, I did encounter the ambassador briefly," Velik admitted. "He came to discuss a potential trade agreement involving Romulan agricultural technology." "Was anyone else present during this meeting?" Odo pressed. "No," Velik responded, perhaps too quickly. Nolan leaned against the doorframe casually. That's odd, because, according to my information, Ambassador Trell never officially visited the Romulan office today. A flicker of annoyance crossed Velik's features before he regained his composure. Perhaps I misspoke. Our encounter was unofficial. Velik stood in the shadowed alcove of Cargo Bay 3, checking his chronometer for the third time. The ambassador was late unusual for someone known for their punctuality. Just as Velik was considering leaving, the cargo bay doors slid open, and Trell slipped inside. "You're late," Velik stated flatly. "I was detained," Trell replied, his skin shifting to a pattern indicating stress. "Minister Carr is becoming problematic." "The Nelvaeans have always been problematic," Velik dismissed. "Do you have the information?" Trell glanced around nervously before removing a small data rod from his pocket, as promised. The complete survey of the Mogai asteroid belt, including the previously undisclosed findings. Velik reached for the rod, but Trell pulled it back. "First, your end of the bargain." With a sigh of annoyance, Velik produced a similar data device. "Romulan agricultural schematics, as agreed, though I still fail to see why your people need such basic technology." "It's not for my people," Trell admitted, surprising Velik. "It's for the colonists in the Dartarian system, a gesture of goodwill to secure their loyalty." The eternal dance of diplomacy," Velik remarked dryly. "Always more complicated than it appears." They exchanged the data rods, each quickly verifying the contents. "There's something else you should know," Trell said, his voice lowered. "The Nelvaeans are receiving support from more than just the Cardassians. There's evidence suggesting involvement from—" A noise from outside the cargo bay interrupted him. Both men froze. "We should continue this discussion later," Velik suggested urgently. Trell nodded. 20,000 hours, my quarters. What I have to show you will change the balance of power in this sector." With that cryptic promise, Trell slipped out of the cargo bay, leaving Velik alone with the data rod and a growing sense of unease. "Ambassador Trell mentioned meeting with you later that evening," Nolan said, watching Velik carefully. "Did that meeting occur?" Velik's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, I was detained by other matters." "How convenient," Odo remarked. "Diplomacy is often inconvenient, Constable," Velik replied smoothly. "If there's nothing more." Nolan pushed away from the doorframe. "For now, though we may have more questions later." As they left the Romulan office, Odo turned to Nolan. "He's hiding something." "Everyone here is hiding something," Nolan replied. "The question is whether it's relevant to our murder." Their next stop was a small, unassuming office with no identifying markings. Nolan knocked twice before entering without waiting for a response. Inside, a Ferengi sat surrounded by various datapads and devices. He looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm when he saw Odo. "Garl," Nolan greeted him casually. "Mercer," the Ferengi responded warily. "What brings security to my humble establishment?" "Ambassador Trell has been murdered," Nolan stated bluntly. Garl's eyes widened. "Terrible business, terrible. But I fail to see how this concerns me." "You're the station's premier information broker," Nolan said. "If anyone was monitoring Trell's communications, it would be you." "Such accusations," Garl protested, hand over his heart. "I'm merely a humble trade facilitator." Odo stepped forward. "We can continue this conversation in a holding cell if you prefer." Garl's demeanor changed instantly. "No need for threats, Constable. Professional courtesy is all I ask." "Professional courtesy suggests cooperation," Nolan pointed out. With a sigh, Garl activated a small device on his desk. "What I'm about to share would cost most people a significant amount of latinum. Consider it your contribution to station security," Nolan replied with a thin smile. "Ambassador Trell," Garl began, "was carrying encrypted data. Very sophisticated encryption, beyond standard diplomatic protocols." "How do you know this?" Udo demanded. Garl's expression turned smug. "Because he tried to send a transmission last night, and my equipment detected the encryption signature. Could you decode it? Nolan asked. Regrettably, no, Garl admitted. But I can tell you, it was addressed to a recipient in the Calandra sector. Nolan and Odo exchanged glances. The Calandra sector was Federation space, but near the Cardassian border, a region of significant strategic importance. Anything else? Nolan prompted. Garl hesitated, then reached beneath his desk and produced a small circular device. This was found by one of my associates near the turbolift where the Ambassador was discovered. It appears to be a short-range signal jammer, likely used to disable the surveillance systems temporarily. Odo took the device, examining it carefully. This has Cardassian design elements, which means exactly nothing on a former Cardassian station, Nolan pointed out. These components could have been scavenged from anywhere. Garl nodded eagerly. Precisely my thinking, Mercer. Their origin tells us little about who would have employed them. Odo pocketed the device. Nevertheless, it's evidence. Thank you for your cooperation. As they left Garl's office, Nolan led Odo to several more embassy offices, each providing fragments of information about Trell's final day. A Bolian trade representative had seen Trell arguing with trade envoy Lyra. A Tsenkethi observer mentioned unusual communications between the Vexillian and Nelvaean delegations despite their public animosity. By the time they reached the final office, Odo's patience was wearing thin. Mr. Mercer, he said as they exited the Tsenkethi office, while I appreciate the tour of your spy network, I'm not convinced this is advancing our investigation. On the contrary, Nolan replied, we've learned several important things. Trell was carrying encrypted data bound for Federation space. He had secret meetings with at least 3 different parties, including the Romulans, and someone went to great lengths to disable the surveillance system during his murder, all of which paints a picture of a complex conspiracy, Odo conceded, but we're no closer to identifying the actual killer. Nolan stopped walking, turning to face Odo directly. That's where you're wrong, Constable. We now have enough pieces to start seeing the pattern. Trell discovered something important enough to get him killed, and I suspect it has nothing to do with the minor border dispute these peace talks are supposedly addressing. You believe the peace talks are at cover for something else? Odo asked, skepticism evident in his tone. I know they are, Nolan assured him, and finding Trell's killer might just expose what that something else is. As they continued walking, the station's comm system activated. Security alert. Unauthorized access detected in Ambassador Trell's quarters. All available personnel respond. Nolan and Odo exchanged a quick glance before breaking into a run toward the diplomatic quarters, their investigation suddenly accelerating from methodical inquiry to urgent pursuit. Nolan and Odo arrived at Ambassador Trell's quarters to find the entrance already surrounded by security personnel. 2 of Nolan's officers stood with weapons drawn, focused on the sealed door. Report, Nolan demanded, slightly out of breath from their sprint across the station. Motion sensors detected movement inside approximately 3 minutes ago, the lead security officer explained. Door was sealed from within using an override code. Odo stepped forward. Have you attempted to communicate with whoever's inside? No response to hails, sir. Nolan moved to the door panel, his fingers dancing across the controls. This is my station. There's no override, I don't know. The panel beeped in protest. Nolan frowned, trying another sequence. Again, rejection. Interesting, he muttered. Someone's modified the security protocols. Perhaps I can be of assistance, Odo suggested. Without waiting for a response, he approached the door seam, his form shifting and flowing as he transformed into a thin liquid state that seeped through the microscopic gap between door and frame. Nolan watched in fascination as the shapeshifter disappeared into the room. Seconds later, the door slid open, revealing Odo standing inside. Clear, Odo announced, but whoever was here left in a hurry. The ambassador's quarters were in disarray. Drawers hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. The computer terminal showed signs of forced access, its casing removed and internal components exposed. They were looking for something specific, Nolan observed, moving carefully through the chaos. Ilara materialized beside them, immediately scanning the room. The ambassador's personal data storage devices are missing. His communications logs have been wiped from the terminal. Can you recover them? Nolan asked. Partially, Ilara replied. I maintain backups of all official communications on the station. However, if he used personal encrypted channels, those would be lost. Nolan finished for her. Damn. Odo knelt beside the computer terminal, examining the exposed circuitry. This was done by someone with technical expertise. The core memory circuits have been physically removed, not just wiped. Nolan ran his hand along the edge of the ambassador's desk, fingers probing beneath the surface. Ah, he said suddenly, a thin smile spreading across his face as he triggered a hidden mechanism. A small compartment slid open, revealing a data rod similar to the one Velik had described. The ambassador had a secret compartment in his desk, Odo observed. Apparently our intruder didn't find it. Nolan carefully extracted the rod. Let's see what was worth killing for. As Ilara prepared to analyze the data rod, a loud explosion rocked the station. The deck plates trembled beneath their feet as emergency alarms began blaring throughout the corridor. What now? Odo demanded. Nolan's comm badge chirped urgently. Sir, there's been an explosion in the delegation's conference room. Minister Carr has been injured. Security lockdown, all decks, Nolan ordered, already moving toward the door. No one enters or leaves the station until further notice. As they rushed toward the conference room, the gravity of the situation became clear. This was no longer just a murder investigation. It was rapidly escalating into a potential diplomatic catastrophe. The conference room doors had been blown outward by the force of the explosion. Debris littered the corridor, and the acrid smell of burned circuitry hung in the air. Inside, medical personnel were already attending to the injured. Minister Carr lay on the floor, his ceremonial robes scorched and torn. A medical officer worked frantically to stabilize him as Nolan and Odo entered. Status? Nolan demanded. Second-degree burns, concussion, possible internal injuries, the medical officer reported. He needs to be moved to the medical bay immediately. Do it, Nolan ordered. As Carr was transported to medical, Nolan surveyed the damage. The explosion had originated from beneath the head of the conference table, exactly where Minister Carr would have been seated during the negotiations. This was no accident, Odo stated, examining the charred remains of what appeared to be an explosive device. Definitely not, Nolan agreed, especially considering Carr was in here alone, hours before the scheduled talks. Perhaps someone believed he was responsible for Ambassador Trell's death and sought revenge, Odo suggested. Or perhaps both attacks are part of the same plan, Nolan countered. Eliminate key players from both delegations, ensure the peace talks fail. But who benefits from continued conflict between such minor powers? Ilara appeared beside them, holding the data rod they'd recovered. I've completed a preliminary analysis, she announced. The data is heavily encrypted, but I was able to access the file headers. It contains detailed surveys of the Mogai asteroid belt, with special focus on unusual radiation signatures in the central region. Radiation signatures? Nolan's brow furrowed. That makes no sense. The dispute is over dilithium deposits. Unless, Odo interjected, the dilithium is merely a cover for something else. A thoughtful expression crossed Nolan's face. Ilara, check if any of our resident diplomats have expertise in exotic radiation or weapons development. After a brief pause, Ilara nodded. 3 individuals on station have backgrounds in those fields. One Romulan scientist currently serving as a cultural attaché, a Breen engineer listed as a trade consultant, and trade envoy Lyra. Lyra? Odo's surprise was evident. The representative from the independent worlds. Her official biography lists her background as economic development, Ilara explained, but cross-referencing with intelligence databases reveals she previously worked for the Zenkethi Coalition's Weapons Research Division. Nolan and Odo exchanged significant glances. We need to speak with Minister Carr, Nolan decided, and we need to find Trade Envoy Lyra before she disappears or strikes again. Minister Carr lay on the bile bed, his injuries stabilized but still serious. His aide stood protectively nearby, eyeing Nolan and Odo with suspicion as they entered. Minister Carr requires rest, the aide objected. He's in no condition for questioning. This won't take long, Nolan assured him, his tone leaving no room for argument. And it may prevent further attacks. The aide hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. Carr's eyes fluttered open as they approached. Come to, finish the job, he rasped, his voice weak but defiant. We're trying to find out who's behind these attacks, Odo corrected him. Both yours and Ambassador Trell's. You were in the conference room alone, hours before the scheduled meeting, Nolan observed. Why? Carr's expression hardened. Preparing my remarks. Minister, Nolan leaned closer. Someone is systematically eliminating key figures in these peace talks. Unless you want to be next on their list, I suggest you start being honest with us. After a long moment, Carr sighed. I was meeting someone. Who? Odo pressed. Trade Envoy Lyra, Carr admitted. She contacted me, claimed to have information about Trell's true agenda. Carr entered the empty conference room, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The message from Lyra had been urgent, insisting on absolute secrecy. As the door slid shut behind him, he saw her standing by the viewport, her elegant green attire contrasting sharply with the stars beyond. Minister, she greeted him without turning. Thank you for coming. Your message said it was urgent, Carr replied, staying near the door. Something about Ambassador Trell. Lyra turned, her expression grave. His death is unfortunate, but perhaps not entirely unexpected, given what he discovered. And what exactly did he discover? Carr asked, his skepticism evident. The true nature of the Mogai asteroid belt, Lyra replied, moving toward the conference table. Tell me, Minister, has your government conducted detailed radiation surveys of the region? Carr shifted uncomfortably. Our preliminary surveys focused primarily on the dilithium deposits. Why? Lyra placed a small data device on the table. Because Ambassador Trell did conduct those surveys, and what he found would have changed everything about these negotiations. I don't understand, Carr admitted, moving closer to examine the device. The Mogai belt contains traces of a rare isotope, Lyra explained, one with tremendous potential for weapons development. The Federation has been quietly encouraging the Vexillians to secure exclusive mining rights, not for the dilithium, but for this isotope. Carr's eyes widened. That's absurd. The Federation has treaties prohibiting the development of such weapons. Treaties can be reinterpreted, Lyra said with a cold smile, especially when the research is conducted by proxy powers beyond Federation jurisdiction. If what you're saying is true, Carr said slowly, it would explain the Federation's unusual interest in our border dispute. Precisely, Lyra nodded, and it would give your government considerable leverage in these negotiations, or enable you to expose the Federation's duplicity to the Quadrant. Carr reached for the data device, but Lyra placed her hand over his. This information comes at a price, Minister. Name it, Carr replied without hesitation. The independent worlds require guarantees of their own, Lyra began. Access rights to specific regions of the belt, diplomatic recognition, and... The door chime interrupted them. Lyra stepped back quickly. Someone's coming. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, review the data. She slid the device into Carr's pocket before moving swiftly toward the secondary exit. Wait, Carr called after her. How do I know this isn't some elaborate deception? Lyra paused at the doorway. Ask yourself, who benefits from keeping your peoples in perpetual conflict, Minister? It isn't the Vexillians, and it certainly isn't yours." With that, she was gone, leaving Carr alone with the data device and a growing sense of being manipulated by forces far beyond his control. "She gave me a data device," Carr concluded, wincing as he shifted on the biobed. "Said it contained proof of Federation involvement in weapons research." "Where is this device now?" Odo asked. "Destroyed. In the explosion. It was in my pocket." Nolan exchanged a glance with Odo. Convenient timing. "Did you review any of the data before the explosion?" Odo inquired. Carr shook his head weakly. "No time. The device activated as soon as she left. Started making a high-pitched sound. Then, nothing. A remote-triggered explosive," Nolan concluded grimly. "You were lucky to survive." "Lyra," Carr muttered, his eyes closing as fatigue overtook him. "Find her. She's the key." As they left the medical bay, Nolan tapped his comm badge. "Security. Locate trade. Envoy Lyra. Consider her armed and dangerous." "Sir," came the immediate response. "Envoy Lyra requested permission to return to her ship 20 minutes ago. She claimed she needed to retrieve important documents for the negotiations." Nolan's expression darkened. "Was she granted permission to leave?" "Yes, sir." "Standard protocols were followed. Lock down her ship. No one leaves until—" "Too late, sir. Her vessel departed 5 minutes ago." Nolan swore under his breath. "Track her. I want to know where she's headed." "Already on it, sir, but she's engaged some kind of masking technology. We've lost her signal." Nolan turned to Odo, determination etched on his features. "She's running, which confirms our suspicions. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." "You have a plan," Odo observed. "Not a question, but a statement." "Always," Nolan replied, already striding toward operations. "It's time we turned the tables on our mysterious trade envoy." As they moved through the corridors, the station's alert system continued to pulse, casting alternating red and yellow light across their faces. The hunt was on, and the stakes had never been higher. "Right." The operations center hummed with activity, staff working feverishly at consoles as Nolan and Odo entered. Alara stood at the central command station, monitoring multiple displays simultaneously. "I've completed analysis of the data rod," she announced without preamble. "The encryption was sophisticated, but ultimately breakable." "Let's see it," Nolan ordered, moving to stand beside her. The main view screen activated, displaying complex charts and readings of the Mogai asteroid belt. As Alara had indicated, unusual radiation signatures permeated specific regions. "This isotope," Nolan pointed to a highlighted section. "I've seen it before, during the border conflicts in the Gentara sector." "The Gentara incident?" Odo's interest was piqued. "That was nearly 50 years ago." Nolan nodded grimly. "Advanced weaponry that left radiation signatures lasting decades. The official investigation blamed rogue elements, but the technology was clearly beyond their capabilities. And now the same isotope appears in a disputed territory between two minor powers," Odo observed. "Each backed by different major players." "Exactly." Nolan's expression hardened. "This was never about dilithium. The Federation, the Cardassians, the Romulans. They're all using these minor factions as proxies to gain access to this isotope without confronting each other directly." "And Lyra?" Odo asked. "Working for someone who profits from the conflict itself," Nolan concluded. "Weapons manufacturers, mercenaries, security contractors. There's an entire industry built around perpetual low-level conflicts." Alara brought up another display. "I've identified Lyra's vessel. It's registered to Tri-Axis Security Consortium, a private military contractor with ties to multiple quadrant powers." "So she killed Ambassador Trell to prevent the peace talks from succeeding," Odo surmised. "And tried to eliminate Minister Carr when he became a liability," Nolan added. "But she's made a mistake. She thinks she's hidden her tracks, but she's left traces even she doesn't realize." Nolan tapped a series of commands into the console. "Every ship that docks at Empire North is tagged with a passive transponder. Undetectable, unless you know exactly what frequency to scan for. Odo raised an eyebrow. That seems like an invasion of privacy. Call it insurance, Nolan replied unapologetically, and in this case it might just save lives. The display shifted to show a star chart, with a small blinking dot moving away from the station. There she is, heading toward the Badlands, perfect place to disappear or rendezvous with her employers. We should alert Starfleet, Odo suggested. Have them intercept her vessel. Nolan shook his head. By the time they mobilize, she'll be long gone. Besides, capturing her isn't enough. We need to expose the entire operation, all the players involved. What do you suggest? Odo asked, his skepticism evident. A slow smile spread across Nolan's face. We're going to give Lyra exactly what she wants, which is the complete failure of these peace talks, culminating in an incident so severe that both delegations withdraw entirely, Nolan explained. Only it won't be real. Odo's expression showed dawning understanding. A deception. Precisely. Nolan turned to Ilara. Prepare a coded transmission to Lyra's vessel. Make it look like it's coming from one of our embassy diplomats. Content should suggest the situation has escalated beyond control. Both delegations are threatening to leave, and there's an opportunity to ensure they do. Ilara nodded, already composing the message. Meanwhile, Nolan continued, addressing his security chief, stage a very public confrontation between the Vexillian and Nelvaean delegations. I want shouting, accusations, maybe even some minor physical altercation, enough to be believable without causing actual harm. And when Lyra returns to capitalize on the chaos, Odo inquired. We'll be waiting, Nolan assured him, with all the evidence needed to expose the entire operation. As the team dispersed to implement the plan, Odo remained beside Nolan. This is quite elaborate for a station security matter. This stopped being a simple security matter the moment Ambassador Trell was killed, Nolan replied. Now it's about preventing outside powers from manipulating smaller factions into destructive conflicts for their own gain, something I have a personal interest in stopping. Odo studied Nolan with newfound curiosity. Perhaps there's more to you than your reputation suggests, Mr. Call. Mercer. Don't get sentimental on me now, Constable, Nolan deflected with a tight smile. We've got work to do. The promenade had been transformed into a theater of diplomatic outrage. Members of both delegations shouted accusations across the central walkway. Security personnel struggling to maintain a semblance of order. Curious onlookers gathered at the periphery, adding to the chaotic atmosphere. From their hidden observation post above the promenade, Nolan and Odo watched the scene unfold. Your people are quite convincing, Odo remarked. Amazing what a little latinum incentive can do, Nolan replied. Even diplomats can be persuaded to put on a show. Lyra's ship has re-entered sensor range. Ilara's voice came through their comms. She's requesting emergency docking clearance, citing a critical system failure. Granted, Nolan ordered. Direct her to Docking Bay 4. The trap is set, Odo observed. Now we wait for our quarry to take the bait. Lyra's sleek vessel settled into the docking berth, its hull showing signs of genuine damage. As the airlock cycled open, Trade Envoy Lyra emerged, her expression a careful mask of diplomatic concern. A junior security officer approached her. Envoy Lyra, welcome back to Empire North. We've been instructed to escort you directly to the emergency conference. Emergency conference? Lyra inquired, her voice perfectly calibrated to convey surprise and concern. Yes, ma'am. The situation has deteriorated significantly in your absence. Both delegations are threatening to withdraw completely. How unfortunate, Lyra replied, a flash of satisfaction briefly crossing her features before being suppressed. Please, lead the way. The security officer led her through surprisingly empty corridors toward one of the station's smaller conference rooms. As the doors slid open, Lyra stepped inside to find not the expected chaos of failing peace talks, but Nolan Mercer and Constable Odo waiting calmly at an otherwise empty table. The doors sealed behind her with a definitive click. "Welcome back, Envoy," Nolan greeted her pleasantly. "We've been expecting you." Lyra's composure slipped only momentarily before her diplomatic training reasserted itself. "Mr. Mercer, Constable. I came as soon as I heard about the deteriorating situation." "Yes, the situation," Odo remarked dryly. "Curious how you learned of it, considering the information was deliberately fabricated." "I don't understand," Lyra replied, her hand drifting subtly toward her pocket. "I wouldn't," Nolan advised calmly. "This room is equipped with weapons suppressors. Whatever device you're reaching for won't function." Lyra's hand stilled. "This is outrageous. I am a diplomatic envoy with full immunity." "Immunity doesn't extend to murder, attempted murder, and sabotage of peace negotiations," Odo countered, placing a datapad on the table. "We have evidence linking you to Ambassador Trell's death and the attempt on Minister Carr's life." "Preposterous," Lyra scoffed, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Nolan activated a holographic display showing the Mogai asteroid belt survey results. Ambassador Trell discovered something valuable in this asteroid belt. Something worth killing for. An isotope with weapons, applications that powers like the Federation, Cardassia, and the Romulan Empire would prefer to access through proxies rather than direct confrontation. "And you," Odo continued, "work for an organization that profits from ensuring these conflicts never end." "Tri-Axis Security Consortium," Nolan added. "Suppliers of defensive technology to both the Vixilians and Nelvaeans, among others. Quite a lucrative business model, as long as peace never breaks out." Lyra's diplomatic mask finally cracked, replaced by cold calculation. "Impressive detective work. But what exactly do you hope to accomplish here?" "You have no jurisdiction to detain me, and any evidence you've gathered would be inadmissible in any neutral tribunal." "We're not interested in prosecuting you, Envoy Lyra," Nolan replied, leaning forward. "We're interested in stopping the manipulation of minor powers for the benefit of weapons developers and major political players." "How noble," Lyra's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And how do you propose to do that?" In response, Nolan activated another display, showing the comprehensive data from Trell's findings being transmitted simultaneously to the Vexillian and Nelvaean governments, the Federation Council, the Cardassian Central Command, and several major news networks across the quadrant. "By ensuring everyone knows exactly what's at stake," Nolan explained. "The truth has a way of complicating carefully orchestrated proxy wars." Lyra's composure shattered completely. "You fool. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "The balance of power." "We'll adjust," Nolan finished for her. "Major powers will find new ways to compete. They always do. But at least these particular minor powers won't be sacrificed as pawns in a larger game. Not this time." "You've made powerful enemies today," Lyra warned, her voice low and dangerous. "I've been making powerful enemies for over a century," Nolan replied with a slight shrug. "It's practically a hobby at this point." Odo stood, signaling the conclusion of their confrontation. "Envoy Lyra, you are being detained on suspicion of murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You will be transferred to Federation custody for further investigation and prosecution." As security personnel entered to take Lyra away, she fixed Nolan with a venomous stare. "This isn't over, Mercer." "It rarely is," Nolan acknowledged quietly. The conference room had been repaired, all evidence of the explosion erased. New representatives from both the Vixillian Alliance and Nelvaean Confederacy sat at the table, their postures noticeably less adversarial than their predecessors. Nolan observed from the doorway as they signed a preliminary accord for joint administration of the Mogai asteroid belt, with strict limitations on isotope extraction and mandatory third-party monitoring of all mining operations. Odo approached, standing beside him to watch the proceedings. "It appears your unorthodox methods have yielded results." For now, Nolan acknowledged, though I have no illusions about lasting peace. The major powers won't give up easily. No, Odo agreed. But you've given these people a chance to determine their own fate. That's something. They turned away from the conference room, walking slowly along the corridor. You know, Odo began, when I arrived on this station, I had certain preconceptions about you based on reports and rumors. Let me guess. Ruthless mercenary, opportunistic war profiteer, morally flexible entrepreneur. Among other, less flattering descriptions, Odo confirmed with a hint of amusement. The reality is more complex. Don't tell me you're developing a soft spot for me, Constable, Nolan teased. What would Major Kira say? I still find your methods troubling, Odo clarified quickly. Your pervasive surveillance network, your willingness to bend or break rules when convenient, your casual attitude toward espionage. But I recognize that in this instance, those same qualities helped prevent a significant injustice and potentially saved lives. Odo extended his hand. Thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Nolan accepted the handshake, genuine respect in his eyes. Likewise, Constable, your investigative skills were instrumental in unraveling this conspiracy. As they reached the docking bay where Odo's shuttle awaited, Nolan paused. You know, if you ever tire of Federation regulations, there's always room for someone with your talents at Empire North. Odo's expression shifted to one of mild horror at the suggestion. I think not, Mr. Mercer. While this collaboration was educational, I prefer the structured environment of Starfleet. Your loss. Nolan shrugged good-naturedly. The offer stands, nonetheless. With a final nod of acknowledgement, Odo boarded his shuttle, leaving Nolan alone on the docking bay. As the shuttle departed, Nolan's comm badge chirped. Mercer here. They've gone. Ilara's voice came through. Both the shuttle and our unwanted visitors from Section 31, who were observing from the commercial deck. Good, Nolan replied. Status of our special project? Proceeding according to schedule. The first test runs of the blink-capable drones have exceeded expectations. Nolan smiled slightly. Excellent. Things are about to get interesting in this quadrant, Ilara. Best we be prepared. Always, she agreed. Shall I prepare the Havoc for departure? We have that meeting with the Ferengi Commerce Authority regarding the Latinum situation. No rush, Nolan decided. For once, I think I'll stay put for a while. Keep an eye on our embassy row. I have a feeling our resident spies will be quite busy in the coming days. As Nolan turned to leave the docking bay, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of Empire North was already beginning. Ripples from the exposure of the proxy war spreading outward, affecting alliances, treaties, and the delicate balance of power throughout the sector. For better or worse, Nolan Mercer had once again altered the course of events in the Alpha Quadrant, guided by his own unique moral compass and centuries of hard-won experience. The game continued, as it always did, with new players and new stakes, but the same fundamental rules, and no one understood those rules better than the man who had survived multiple lifetimes to master them.